Well, Srila Prabhupada told us that Lalit Prasad Thakur, who was the brother of his spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it became strained at a certain time. And they parted ways. Otherwise, for a while they were together. So, Srila Prabhupada made a courtesy call to see him. I had been sent to go there ahead of time to find out the situation with Bhaktivinoda Thakur's birthplace, because he was living in a place called Dwadasa Mandira at Birnagar. And this is called Dwadas Mandir because there's 12 like Shiva temples, all very little, small, beautiful little temples lined up in a row. And that means where you get the Dwadasa Mandir. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur spent a good section of his childhood there. There's a tree under which, mango tree under which he was seated. And it's a very beautiful place. And so we went to see, so I had initially talked with Lalit Prasad Thakur, and he was agreeable that ISKCON could do something. So then Prabhupada went there and discussed it with him. And it looked like they were going to give us, he had a big, I don't know exactly what the acreage is. Maybe it's like 25 acres of land, and maybe they would give us about half of it, where we could have a temple and do something for Bhaktivinoda Thakur's birthplace, which was on the side of a little pukur, a little water reservoir. And but the actual birthplace was a small little temple, which the door was broken off and it was in ill repair. And Prabhupada was practically crying when he saw that. So initially it seemed that things were working out. And then Prabhupada went a second time to kind of finalize everything. And Lalit Thakur, he's a very pure soul. He was like 97 years old at that time, if not 98. I think he lived to be 101, 102. And he would chant all the day. He'd just be chanting nonstop. There were deities upstairs on the second floor, and he had a library of all kinds of Bhaktivinoda Thakur books. And he had some disciples. It seemed one of his more intimate disciples was a very elderly lady, maybe in her 60s or 70s, who was called Bhakti Ma. And it was very impressive to see someone from a whole other era, like a century ago, you know. And he explained his own history that he was a lifelong brahmachari, never married. He was working for the government till he was maybe in his 50s. As I forget what was the employment, something more like a clerical, white-collar thing with the government. And then he retired. And so now he was, but even throughout his life, he was doing sadhana bhakti. So it was nice to know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had more than one child that was active. And he actually had a lot of disciples. He was doing the Namhata preaching in Bangladesh and different parts of Bengal. But it was in a particular area. There was some disciple called Sachinanda, I think, who was actively preaching in the villages. This was kind of the backdrop. And then He was sitting in his little room on his bed, and he didn't move at this age. He didn't move much. Even he was bathed in his bed. I think he went to the bathroom in his bed, and they would brag that even though he would go to the toilet there, it smelled like roses, which is not the normal.
You experienced that?
I experienced that smell. I didn't, there was no bad smell in the room. I can't say firsthand,
Yeah.
But of course, with every person like that, they're surrounded by different people. And I think that his initial inclination was, as he had agreed with Prabhupada to do something jointly, but some of his followers had insisted that shouldn't give it. That's the impression I got. And the second time when Prabhupada went there, we were driving on the way to Calcutta and or Mayapur. It's about an hour drive from Mayapur. Then Prabhupada was given a seat, and he was discussing about developing the birthplace of Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. But this time there was a different mood, and it was indicated that they weren't agreeable now to giving a portion or to have an agreement with ISKCON. And it was obviously they didn't have the capacity. They do some village preaching. They were enthusiastic in his presence to do some things, but it wasn't. They didn't have the capacity or the wherewithal to actually develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So the Prabhupada became very impatient. He became very upset that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was so great that he deserves to have really such a wonderful facility, a wonderful monument for his greatness. And Prabhupada had talked about a library, a display, an exhibition, an ashram, a preaching facility, and fixed up his birthplace temple. But also everything was being canceled with no reason given. Okay, if they could do it was one thing. So then Prabhupada, he suddenly became very intense in a very loud voice. He was saying, isn't it sinful? Isn't it sinful if somebody can develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but you're not allowing? Or was it the opposite? Isn't it sinful that you cannot do it? That somebody cannot develop, that if somebody cannot develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and they won't let anyone else who could develop do it, then isn't that sinful? I think that was quite a few years now. Because it was, so the question was, they had it, but they couldn't do it. We could do it, but they didn't want to let us. So then nothing's going to happen. It's going to stay status quo. It's going to stay in an undeveloped state. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, still to this day, it's worse rundown than what it was then. And Prabhupada repeated this about 4 or 5 times, very loudly, almost, I wouldn't say shouting, but I would say just maybe one level below that. Very intensely, loudly declaring, asking us a question. And then nobody said anything. Then he walked out. As he went out, then he turned and there was a few of us, secretaries and assistants. Then he said, because I asked as a question, there was not an offense. I mean, he was kind. He was talking to someone, his brother, god brother, or something, of his own spiritual master. But he was put in a situation where Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his point of view, was being offended. And therefore, he thought he had a right, he said, he expressed he had a right to question it, and by questioning it, it wasn't an offense. if he had accused, like, you're nonsense, you didn't get, you whatever, something like that would have been maybe offensive. But it's because he questioned, isn't it offensive? Isn't it offensive? Isn't it sinful? So that was an interesting understanding about how somebody can inquire, even if it's very intensively, but it's not technically an offense.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna,